My name is Jeremy, and this is Good Beer Matters.
In the Netherlands, has I guess from in the 80s was a bit of a wasteland concerning beer. We wanted to bring something original, and we wanted to bring the passion from the smaller craft brewers. I like craft beer that has a story, so either there's some history behind it from the brewery or the beer itself.
Once upon a time, American brewers traveled to Europe, rediscovered beer, and became inspired. They came home and started the craft beer revolution, disrupting the homogenous macro brew industry. Approximately 30 years later, they returned the favor. My next guest tells his story of infusing American craft into the Dutch beer culture. We find great experiences at the intersection of craft and culture. These are the stories of us, of great food and the beer that brings it all together. For the craft and culture of beer, this is episode 127 of Good Beer Matters with Michiel Anema of All Kinds of Beers. Today we get to jump back into the Good Beer Matters virtual tour around the world, and for this episode, I wish I were there in person. You just showed me a wonderful beer I wish I could try, but we're going all the way to the Netherlands with my new friend Michiel, who does a lot of things with beer in there. But I'm gonna, Michiel, please, first of all, thank you for coming on to the Good Beer Matters podcast. Will you please formally, much better than I did, introduce yourself and tell us what you do in beer in the Netherlands?
Well, hello, Jeremy. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's an honor, and I'm the co-founder of All Kinds of Beers, and we import craft beer from the United States to the Netherlands, and well, we've been doing that since 2017.
Uh, well, I'm going to start with this because this is just fun. When we're recording this, it's my morning. I
Yeah.
just recently finished off my espresso, but of course it's your evening and you're already starting a happy hour. Will you show us that bottle that you just showed me, and tell us
Oh
about it?
yes. I'm drinking a beer from a brewery called Kegs. It's a Dutch brewer, and they're very young brewer. I think they're about a year old. And this is a Kvijk Pale Ale, and Kvijk is an original Norwegian yeast of farmhouse yeast.
Hmm.
And the this is a pale ale. It's really it's an American style pale ale, so it has the hoppy fruitiness, but in the aftertaste you get a bit of more bitterness, but with earthy tones. So
Yeah.
it's like in layers, and it is a very original, interesting beer.
I didn't have a Kvike farmhouse beer, but it was a farmhouse beer from a local brewery from where I am. And last night, it just reminded me how much I love those beers and how easy drinking they are, but yet uh, yeah, they're very thought provoking if we allow them to. But just I want to get to know you a little bit more. I want my audience to get to know you a little bit more. Tell us about how you came to beer as a profession and as a passion.
Well, my beer passion actually started in the United States. I've always been interested in beer, but when I was young growing up, and started drinking beer, there wasn't much else than Pilsner and maybe some Belgian blondes, and that was it. And when I visited my friend and business partner Carlo in North Carolina in the early 2000s, I noticed that like there was a whole lot of beer available, which I didn't know. Never heard of India Pale Ale, never heard of brown ale, and so I started drinking New Belgium Fat Tire, and
Hmm.
that kind of hooked me on craft beer.
That
So when
I
I
remember that was one of the beers that that enamored me, especially in the '90s. You know, the '90s, that was the go-to beer, and I remember thinking that this is so much better than what what my father was drinking when I was a kid. And
Mm.
it's funny how I look back at all the beers that kind of influenced me and inspired me to do what I do now. And Fat Tire was one of those uh, beers in the early part of my uh, beer drinking life, when I was legally drinking, I should say. That it was just like, wow, this is good. I need to find more of this.
Yeah, well, I actually did. So, but well, Fat Tire is a very accessible beer, and especially if you compare to an IPA. If you never drink a beer like an IPA and you're
Hmm.
used to Pilsner and used to Belgium style beers, like you take your first sip of an IPA, you think, oh, that's bitter. No, never
Hmm.
again. And then,
Yeah.
like later, you start appreciating the hoppy and fruity tones. And I did. And when I came back to the Netherlands, I couldn't find any IPAs over there. So at first, I started homebrewing, and then later, a Scottish brand got introduced to the Dutch market called BrewDog. I think they're very famous at the moment, but they
Yeah.
weren't then. And well, they had an IPA, and I guess that's how it started in the Netherlands,
So,
at least for
so
IPAs.
well, how did you go from being in the U.S. and drinking a Fat Tire to now you are a co-owner of of a beer import company? Excuse me.
Uh, oh, in in the 90s, like there was more interest in craft beer, but not mainly American beers. But the early 2000s, um, people started getting interested into India Pale Ales and into bourbon barrel aged stouts, and those came from the United States. And so there were more import businesses who started to import beer from the United States. But I couldn't find any beer from North Carolina, and that's where I got my craft beer experience from. And I thought, well, maybe it's an idea to start doing something for North Carolina beers. So we made a business plan and we started talking to some brewers, and that's how it started.
So, but why just North Carolina? Why not the eastern part of the U.S. or beyond?
Well, we didn't wanted to limit ourselves to North Carolina, but we thought it was logistically easy to start with just one state, because of the distances in the United States. So if you would have one brewer from Virginia and one brewer from North Carolina, one brewer from Kentucky, it would take a whole lot of uh, transport to consolidate. And what we did is we wanted to consolidate beer from multiple brewers into one container, so we could bring smaller batches of beer from small independent brewers, so, without putting a strain on their production.
Okay, and so that was just the simple logistics of a small business of we're going to start here and then we'll take over the world, right?
Yes, we wanted to bring something original, and we want to bring the passion from the smaller craft brewers who are involved from the start uh, of the beer till the end of the process. And with like larger breweries, usually that isn't the case. I mean, they have staff and they make the beers, and the brewer themselves could be in the office the whole day. And
Yeah.
we specifically wanted to bring the passion that a, a small brewery brings to his beer.
And so now you're bringing these beers into the Netherlands to share that love of beer, specifically from North Carolina, but you're sharing that with the rest of your fellow beer drinkers in the Netherlands, correct?
Uh, well, we did. At the moment, we do not import any beers from North Carolina, and that's like since COVID.
Oh,
We
okay.
had a lockdown, and like we took a bite out of a company, and then we had to move to smaller shipments, and we could only do that to cooperate with an exporter from the United States, and they do currently not have any beers from North Carolina. So at the moment, we only work with some breweries from Colorado.
Okay. So, but still, you're bringing beers in from the U.S. into the Netherlands
Yes.
to. So, I want to hold on to that thought just for a second. It, I want to help me understand a little bit more about the the cultural beer history. I mean, specific to beer, but I mean, because I'm sure the history would just be vast and long. But tell me about the history of beer in the Netherlands. I mean, that led up to this point where you're bringing beer in from the U.S.
Uh, well, in the Netherlands, has I guess from in the 80s was a bit of a wasteland for concerning beer. Um, I guess in the early 80s, I think we had under 20 breweries in the Netherlands, and they all brewed Pilsner. And there were some Belgian beers available and some German beers, but that was it. Um, and then in the Netherlands, more people started to get interested in craft beer, and some people who wanted to bring back some and to keep some Dutch beer culture. So some people started home brewing. Most of them started with Belgium style beers, and then it moved up from other style beers. And like I say, in the 80s, the culture and I guess the most popular beer in the Netherlands still is Pilsner. But if you look at how much things have changed from the 80s till now, there's more than 800 breweries in the Netherlands at the moment, and they make a wide variety of beers from Belgium, German styles, some forgotten Dutch style beers, and I guess most brewers are inspired by the current craft beer scene that's popular in the United States. So a lot of IPAs, a lot of stouts and pastry stouts, and some bourbon barrel aged stouts.
So back in the 80s, it's like the world beer culture. There were a lot of parallels, it seems, because U.S. had our prohibition that affected us and only us in a very direct way. But by the time we got to the 70s and 80s, everyone had their mass-produced lager. What were the big companies that were producing this mass-produced lager in the Netherlands at that point?
Heineken was the biggest and still is. And you had some smaller breweries, and most of them were taken over by Heineken or already part of Heineken, and some independent. And then I think one is part of AB InBev. So you had Heineken, Amstel, Hertog Jan, and I don't know the other brands by heart.
Hmm. But essentially, so you had these big brands that were producing the bulk of the beer, the lion's share of the beer.
Yeah.
About what time frame, what year, give or take, did the craft beer renaissance emerge in the Netherlands?
I think it kind of went into phases. So in the end of the 80s, there were already more beers available in the Netherlands than in the early 80s, but I guess mostly then still from Belgium and Germany. And in 2000, I get more Dutch brewers started to actually the 90s, more Dutch breweries started to uh, brew their beers on a larger scale, so they could only also be brought to supermarkets. For instance, one of the more famous is a brewery called Jopen.
Hmm.
They make a whole wide variety of beers, but also they brought back some forgotten Dutch beer styles such as Hoppen beer and Koit, which is a Gruit style beer. And
I'm not aware of these.
you never heard
So
of
these I've heard of Gruit beers, but I've never heard of these specifically Dutch beers. Tell us more about them. What are they
well,
like?
Coit is a actually a Gruit style beer, and it has Gale in it. And Gale is a bit of a mythical herb from which they say it's only wise to be harvested by naked witches during full moon. I'm not sure if that's true, but um,
That makes for a
it,
great
it's it.
marketing story, though.
Yeah, uh, and apparently Gruit also is a natural aphrodisiac, so it's an interesting beer. And
So so you have that, and you have alcohol going. That I can see where that would lead. Yeah.
uh, Hoppenbeer is, I guess, also a beer recipe from somewhere in 1500, and it was one of the first beers made by hop. So a recipe of one of the first beers brewed with hop uh, in the town of Haarlem. So
Are
before
there
that, all
other
beers were made with Gruit, but not with hops.
are there a lot of uniquely Dutch beers like the ones you just mentioned, or are there just like the two you mentioned, and or are there just a few?
Um, there are more, but there's one of them that comes to mind is called Maastricht's Eid, or Old Maastricht, which is a oak aged beer from 3.5%, which is I think slightly similar to Flemish red.
Okay. So
So it's
are these beers that you can still find today?
well, those are the beers you can actually find. I mean, there's some more recipe that probably have been forgotten, but no one like tried to remake them or doesn't know how to.
So these are uniquely Dutch styles of beer that, when you go to the Netherlands, you can still find them, enjoy them, and try them,
Yes,
right?
but like in
Fantastic.
limited amounts, I guess. I mean, they're not very
Gotcha.
popular, but the breweries they go through a lot of efforts to maintain the style.
That's great. I'm not aware of this. I can't wait to someday, knock on wood, get out there and
Uh,
try them.
well,
Um,
you're most welcome.
I, I've got you on camera saying that, so I'll show up at your
Uh,
doorstep one day, just knocking. um, but so let's talk about that. That was kind of the recent brief history of beer in the Netherlands, with some unique styles, with some macro styles. Uh, I find it interesting that in the history of American beer, I'm going to say we, the royal we, but a lot of the U.S. travelers in the let's just say the '60s for round numbers, they would go to Europe, discover this amazing beer, come back and decide that I want to try brewing this at home because our options are limited here, um, and that really spurred our American craft beer movement. That and people can argue this all day long, but I'm just going to say again, for round numbers, we can trace the root back to the '60s. Really got a little bit of steam in the '80s, started getting some momentum in the '90s and 2000s. It just took off. And yeah, again, round numbers. If anyone wants to argue with me, you have to buy me a beer. But that was the kind of the general timeline of the American craft beer awakening. What I find interesting is we Americans went to Europe to become inspired by the beer you have. And what I'm hearing now from people all around the world is now uh, people in Europe are becoming inspired by the beer in the U.S. and coming back
yes.
to their country and trying to relate that. What do you make of that story?
Oh, in one point, it's the same thing. It's funny. I mean, because actually one of the most of the American styles are uh, based on European styles. So for instance,
Absolutely.
India Pale Ale is an old British style, but I mean it's kind of been boosted by American brewers with the American hops, and that's what made it popular. And um, I guess before American brewers decided to do that, no one. I guess the only barrel aged stout were the old ones that actually gave the name to imperial stout. Uh, so the stouts that went in barrels and were shipped to Russia.
I find it interesting that like you're saying, and we're kind of adding to the story of we Americans take this British style beer and add our own unique ingredients. It becomes popular, and then next thing you know, it's going back to Europe. I had a conversation with a gal from Ninkasi Brewing in Lyon, France, talking about they're making their French IPA, but in typical fashion, they were taking the IPA, but they're using their ingredients. They're using like Aramis hops or something like that, where you're getting these more. I'm not going to say unique. That might be a little strong, but using more French ingredients to get that French flavor, which will be very different from an American IPA, American West Coast IPA. It'll be very different from a British IPA. um, are you seeing, just using the IPA as an example, are you seeing that example of this beer style being brewed in different parts around Europe with endemic ingredients?
You mean the India Pale Ale? If I
Yeah,
found it
just for
somewhere
example,
else
as
in,
one example.
well, I guess there's Belgian IPAs, and they have the particular Belgium yeast. So the yeast you
Mhm.
find in a
Yeah.
saison is then in an IPA, and well, that's interestingly different. I personally do not like it, but it's interesting. So like you have
Yeah.
an IPA, but then with the horse blanket flavor in it.
Yeah. 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 I find some of those flavors a little competing, like in the Northwest. Again, I'm using the word "we" very liberally, but I'll say we came up with a, black IPA, or the Cascadian Dark Ale, and it's just these dark
Mm,
roasted stout-like grains with the hops of an IPA, and it was a great idea, but it just was a little too much for my palate. But I love that. I love that they're trying, and I
mm,
love the idea of carving out our own unique take and flavor on this this style that kind of connects us together. If you know what I mean.
mm. I do. I actually like black IPAs. Um, the thing I needed to get used to is like it's kind of contradictory. I mean, it's black and it's a pale ale, but
Yeah, yeah,
uh,
yeah. I think
I
that's
guess.
why some people started naming it the Cascadian Dark Ale. It's kind of like a homage to the Northwest with Cascadia, but yeah, a black pale ale is, you know kind of an oxymoron. But um, so where are we in the state of the craft beer movement, or the just the beer culture in the Netherlands now? Today, what is it like?
Um, well, a bit similar to the United States, but also a bit different. We still have like we have Bock beer, which is part of our culture. So every year, a lot of brewers in the fall, a lot of brewers make a Bock, and there's also a large Bock beer festival in Amsterdam, which is very popular. And they have a competition for who makes the best Bock beer this year. Um, and well, Belgian beers still are very popular, and I guess those beers are also more accessible to for craft brewers to start getting into craft beer. And last couple of years, German beers have been growing in interest, and
Mm,
also the lager style beers. And I guess that's also because the larger manufacturers they keep on moving increasing their prices, and so people also start looking for alternatives, which they can find in cheaper German lagers and pilsners.
You know, one of the things, kind of one of the patterns I've noticed in having these conversations with people around the world is are those cultures that have a much longer history, not always, but oftentimes are more respectful of tradition. And when we get into that balance of tradition versus innovation, some of these longer lived cultures lean more toward tradition. Um, but you mentioned it before, but now all the beers from the U.S. are very innovation driven and are coming back to Europe to create this new influence, this new wave of craft beer. Where do you see the Netherlands kind of on that continuum between tradition and innovation?
Well, I think we're kind of the same as in the United States. Most of the brewers are not bound by the same traditions as German and Belgian brewers are. I mean, there's brewers in the Germany and Belgium who uh, threw the traditions overboard and started uh, to brew new styles and put more innovation in their beers. Um, but like we in the Netherlands, there wasn't like the same culture as in Germany or in Belgium, which kind of like bound us. So the breweries that started to brew craft beer, they had no local tradition to fall back on. Only the either the traditions from our neighbors or the tradition from the United States from far away, which is was a popular and upcoming style of beer. So most of them started to be inspired by United States brewers.
Is there more of a sense of creativity and openness to new things as a general cultural element in the Netherlands?
Uh, that in combination with a very entrepreneurial spirit.
Oh, interesting.
So I guess that's one of the main reasons we went from 20 to 800 breweries in such a short period of time. And well,
So now is a fantastic time to go drink some beer in the Netherlands.
there's
Sounds like.
plenty of beer. uh, So yes,
So
I guess considering craft beer, more and more bottle shops, more and more bars, they started to get more taps and bring more beers. In hospitality, we do have a system which kind of held the hospitality back because banks have traditionally always been reluctant to lend money to hospitality businesses. So
hmm,
a lot of people who wanted to start a bar had to turn to breweries, and the breweries would lend them their money and would also pay for part of the inventory for of the bar. But then, as a result, they had to sign a contract which made them only sell the beers of those breweries. Uh,
gotcha.
so.
Thank you. I
Uh,
was going to ask you about this next. I mean, what kind of access is there for these smaller brewers to take carve out their slice of the collective pie? Do they have
well, if
any
you would,
options at this point?
well, yes and no. I mean, they have to go to the bottle shops and the independent bars or bars who do not have such strict contracts. And I think a lot has changed in the last 5 years. 5 years, um, the 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 breweries such as AB InBev and Heineken, they started to hop on the wagon of craft beer. So they took over some local craft breweries, and I guess that also, and they did that because the bars who were bound by the contracts started to ask Heineken ABF like we need to be able to serve craft beer because that's what the public is asking, and
Yeah,
so they either got new contracts which would allow them to bring beers outside of their contract, or they would get beer through AB InBev for Heineken from the brewers
To
they
your
have
best
taken
knowledge,
over.
to your best knowledge, how did AB InBev and Heineken respond to this demand for more craft beer? I mean, did they open up space? Did they guard it fiercely? How did that play out from your point of view?
Well, I think they try to prevent it at the beginning, and when they realized they couldn't, they joined it and started to take over breweries.
So if you can't beat them, join them and then beat them.
If you can't beat them, take them over, kind of.
Yeah, yeah, and forgive me for sounding a little skeptical right there,
Uh,
but there's a trend uh, or a pattern that emerges from that whole scenario, and it just kind of repeats itself. But that's a different conversation for a different day, I suppose.
mm,
Um,
I,
you know, go. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I think you were about to say something.
I guess it's also a bit of in waves. I heard that AB InBev is actually planning to get rid of some of those craft breweries.
Mm.
So I guess they try and get return back to cheap pilsner. For well, cheap
But
isn't for their what they think is cheap. Then
well, it's funny to just kind of know that the greater cycles of things. I'll see in the Northwest, you have all of us quote unquote beer enlightened people who love our craft beer, have loved our craft beer for decades and decades and decades. You'll still see that people will go out and just have a cheap mass produced lager just because it's quick and easy, and so there's a little bit of romance heading back in that direction to certain brands that I've noticed, and uh, but I think all in all, it's all here to stay. And it's just kind of funny to see how it just the pendulum swings back and forth.
mm. Well, yeah, I agree. I think it's here to stay. But I guess there's also a lot of people who have some sort of a brand loyalty. So I mean, if you nowadays you see, for instance, you see Guinness everywhere. Uh, Guinness is always has been a popular beer, and I guess
Hmm.
now it's popular in the Netherlands as well. And so I guess it's just like um, most of the craft beer, the people who enjoy craft beer in the Netherlands, um, they like to try a lot of different beers as possible. So they just move on from a beer they tried before, but now, and I guess that's a good thing. Now we've moved a bit on from a phase where even people who enjoy craft beer, they kind of stay loyal to the breweries they think are good, and they try the beers they know they're good.
Yeah. Yeah, I can speak for myself. I see that same trend, but I'll speak for myself. I take it on as a personal duty to try as much beer as I can, but I definitely have some of my favorites. That some that I've been visiting since the '90s, and beers that I've fallen in love with that I don't drink every day, but I go back to on occasion just because it has such a great memory. And so yeah, there's a little bit of loyalty there too. Um, yeah, speaking more uh, people traveling to the Netherlands to whether they're on vacation and or traveling through Europe, but if I and anyone else were to travel to the Netherlands to enjoy a beer, enjoy some food, what would how would you describe that experience to someone who's never done that before?
Um, it kind of depends on where you're going. I guess like the larger cities, they have a lot of access to craft beer and to some brewers you can actually visit. And I would definitely advise anyone who wants to learn more, experience Dutch craft beer, to at least go to the town of Haarlem, which is one of the oldest craft beer cities. And they have two magnificent craft breweries. Or actually, one of them recently has been taken over by Swinkels. So they're a larger factory brewers as well, but their beers are still good, and they're
Mm,
called Uiltje. And there's another brewery, Jopen, and their brewery is in an old church, and it's a beautiful location, and they have some good beers. So it's especially in the summer. It's a very nice experience.
And so what kind of are we looking at all the usual European beers, some of the American usual suspects, or are there other? Well, you talked about some of the unique beers that someone might find from in the Netherlands a little bit ago. Let me
Hmm.
ask a better question then. So if I were to show up tomorrow and say, Michiel, let's go have a beer and a bite to eat, what kind of food would we expect to come along or to go along with the beers that you'd take me to see?
Uh, but I guess most of the more craft beer orientated places do have like a simple menu, so more like a bistro kind of menu.
Hmm.
So and some of them are have like are specially themed. For instance, that they only serve vegan food. Um, and there's I think there's one or two restaurants who like specialize in beer menus. So you could get there and get um, a menu which has like special beers for every course that you have instead of wine.
And so what you mentioned like that bistro, what kind of food do they serve? If I've
Um,
never been to the Netherlands, but for anyone who's never been there, what kind of food are we looking at? Like in the U.S., if you visited me, we'd go down the street to a brewery, and almost guaranteed you're going to have a burger, you're going to have some wings, some fries, a typical American pub food. What is typical Dutch pub food?
well, typical Dutch food. One of the most typical Dutch pub foods are actually snacks. So, have you ever heard of bitterballen?
No.
Uh, or croquettes?
Yes, I love croquettes.
Uh, I mean, a bitterball is actually a small croquette, so in the shape of a ball. So
Okay.
it's a battered beef sauce, um, and you get it served deep fried. So that's like one of the most typical snacks in a Dutch bar. And the bars that serve food usually serve a simple menu, such as a burger or a steak or salmon and fries or something like that. Um, well, yeah,
Well, and
simple. Like,
well, and I've spoken to a brewer I've actually met in the Netherlands, and he was American, but his family is Dutch, so he went back to the Netherlands. But he told me that there, and please correct me if I have this wrong, but with your fries and even with your burger, you use a lot more mayonnaise with that, especially to dip your fries into. Is that still a thing,
oh
or
yes,
is that accurate?
if you're in the Netherlands, you have to have mayonnaise with your fries.
And I can just feel a lot of Americans kind of cringing because there are those of us who love mayonnaise and those of us who do not like mayonnaise at all. Um,
Uh,
and I'm more in that latter camp. I'm not a huge fan of mayonnaise, but in the name of science, I tried fries with mayonnaise one day, and frankly, it was actually really good.
mm. I guess, and at the moment, there's a new kind of hype, and it's called Jopen sauce, of Jopi sauce, and it's mayonnaise with a bit of tomato sauce and onions and some other spices. And people like it a lot. So nowadays you see it everywhere.
And to me, that just sounds like a different kind of aioli. And of course, aioli is just fancy mayonnaise, but yeah, that sounds wonderful, actually.
Uh, well, yeah, then only without the garlic, I guess, because aioli has huge amounts of garlic.
Yeah.
I
Well,
like it, but uh,
I like garlic. People don't like me after I've had garlic, but still. Um, from your perspective, because you're importing beer, and you've been part of the beer world for a while. From your experience, what does it take, or I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. How do you define and then deliver a great beer experience? and not just a Dutch beer experience, but a international beer experience?
Well, for me personally, that would be a lot of different beers with a story. I like craft beer that has a story. So either there's some history behind it, so from the brewery or the beer itself, um, and it's it has some original flavors, maybe some complex layers of flavors, and some food with it, but not like the huge amounts of full plates of food, but more like um, small dishes with uh, well, foods that either complement or totally contradict the beer that you're drinking, but still kind of like make it a unique flavor experience.
Yeah, I like that idea. I especially as I get older, I don't love going out to eat and getting full and walking out of there thinking, "Oh, I had too much." I don't like that, and I used to do that all the time when I was younger and could handle all those excess calories. But now that I'm older and supposedly wiser, I try to avoid that. But I found doing the snacks along with beers is a good way to go.
No, that's what I love. I mean, I've experienced the other side as well, especially in Germany. They like large portions as well over there. And if you go to Bavaria, well, you have like these huge schnitzels with fried potatoes and a thick cabbage, and then you
Hmm.
get a liter of Hefeweizen. It just like fills up on top
Yeah,
of the meal.
yeah,
So like,
and my experiences along those lines, yeah, it's like, yeah, that's delicious. But I
uh,
really loved when I was in Spain years ago, having the tradition of tapas y cañas, having the small plates and these small beers that you drink them quickly so they don't warm up. They're always fresh and they're always coming out. I preferred that. That was way more fun,
oh yeah, you can make me happy with that one as well.
right?
I like, and like you can do that with any kind of kitchen. You can just like make small dishes and well, add some special beers to any special meal, and you can have a great experience.
Yeah. Um, for anyone who's listening, who doesn't know a lot about the Netherlands, who's never been to the Netherlands, and I include myself in that one. What do you think is important for the rest of us to know and understand about the Netherlands and the beer and all that?
Um, you can find any style of beer in the Netherlands. So, as I said, it doesn't have a very specific tradition, but you can find some traditional Dutch beers. Um, and as I said, we have a larger snack culture than like a very culinary culture. Um, so, if you want like the total culinary beer and food experience, you need to really look hard where you're going. But if you just want like the typical Dutch bar experience, you can just go to any bar which has some good beers and then order a plate of cheeses and sausages or some bitterballen, and well, that's the Dutch experience.
That sounds fantastic. So, as a kind of a wind down question series, that's independent of Netherlands, but of course, this is all just your experience. But tomorrow, because of your service to beer culture, tomorrow we are going to make you the king of the beer world for an entire day.
Oh wow.
What would be the first thing you would change?
Oof, that's a difficult question. What would be the first thing I would change? Um, in the Netherlands, I would try to break through the rule where, like the amount of power that the larger breweries have. So maybe like create a fund where people who would like to start a hospitality, a bar, serving craft beer could get funds instead of having to turn to one of those breweries.
So is the goal of that to just have equal access to a variety of beers for consumers,
Yes, to create a
or
more
is it to
equal
break up
to
the control the
yes to break
yeah,
the control and to create a more equal playing field.
fantastic. Well, and of course, being a small business owner yourself, I mean that's just how do you get big in the first place? Well, you start small. So let's give everyone a chance. Um,
Yep, true.
so at the end of your royal day, we're going to send you anywhere that you want to go on Earth, and you can have any beer and any food. Where would you go, and what would you have?
Uh, any beer, any food. Another very difficult question. um, well, we had months of cold and rainy weather, so I probably would go to a nice a nice sunny area where they have a lot of craft beer. I mean, I said I like to try a lot of craft beer, so I wouldn't be happy with an area that just has one style of beer, even if I would like the beer. So I guess in general, just like a nice tropical environment with a lot of craft beer.
I like it.
Uh,
I'll do my best to meet you there. That sounds perfect.
uh, oh, will do.
um, so then, kind of like the last big question I have for you is why does good beer matter so much to you?
um, Beer is not just a tasty drink. Beer stands for friendship, um, uh, which you experience together with a good glass of craft beer. Beer can be combined with a lot of foods. So beer stands for gezelligheid. It's a typical Dutch word for coziness. And I guess so it stands for special experience with special people for me. And that's how I view the craft beer world. So I still have a day job as well. All kinds of beers is something I do on the side as a hobby. But since I started doing this, I've met so many different people who are either working in a bar or owning a bar or owning a bottle shop, and those are all special people who have a story to tell, and we share the same love, which is love for craft beer. And those are mostly very nice people who are also very interested in their fellow humans, especially fellow humans who like craft beer. So it's the world of craft beer is a wonderful world, and I enjoy every minute of being in it.
I couldn't agree more. And that's a big reason why I do this. Is just to
Uh,
meet that I call it the tribe. I'm just meeting my tribe from different parts of the world because it's an amazing thing. For anyone who wants to learn more either about your company, all about beers, or even investigate even further into Dutch beer culture, where would you send them? Where can they connect with you if they wanted to?
well, all kinds of beers is on Facebook and Instagram, and we also have a website, and and you can find my contact details over there. So you can either contact me through um, Instagram or Facebook, or find my email and send me a message.
Awesome. And I guess last thing is, do you have any final words of wisdom or any calls to action for anyone listening?
Um, well, try a lot of beers, and if you like a beer, try it a couple of times more. Support your local brewery.
Fantastic. Michiel, thank you so much for coming onto the podcast, kind of sharing, giving us a glimpse into the window into Dutch culture. And um, I feel, I feel ashamed is not the right word. I'm sorry that I don't know more about the Dutch culture, and that's, but that was part of my interest in wanting to talk to you and other people in different parts. Is I want to know what it's like in these different cultures to have this beer and have this international culture, but a very unique, specific take on that. And international culture being the beer culture. But thank you for sharing your experience and your life within the Dutch beer culture with us.
Uh, oh, you're very welcome, and I hope you will be able to visit shortly. I'll be most happy to well join you for a beer and good food.
And some good croquettes, I hope.
Oh
I
yeah,
love some good
bitterballen.
croquettes.
uh, uh,
Yeah,
so
I'll
bitterballen
have to work on my language and pronunciation for sure.
and good beers. Well, we'll go on a tour.
Absolutely.
That's good.
Awesome. Thank you again.
Yes, you're welcome. Have a good afternoon.
It never ceases to amaze me that beer culture is a global thing. As different as we are, we're still very much alike. But while trends spread across the planet, those differences inspire us to keep beer interesting and new. I would argue that it's these differences that connect us together. In the next episode, we head to Munich, where there's a school and a brewery that has been defining beer culture for nearly 1,000 years. I'm on a virtual tour of the craft and culture of beer around the globe. I've put Good Beer Matters on video so I can take you along for the ride. If you know of a person, a place, or a beer story that needs to be told, let me know. Meanwhile, grab a beer, hang out with friends, and let your world open up. Thank you for listening. Cheers.